All right, so guys, here's the way we're going to operate today. As we know, hot topic typically is 30 minutes or less. That's what we always shoot for. We're going to see what today brings because the last hot topic we did a open forum because we had just moved into the announcement, and it hit because two things had changed. Real Comp had made the big adjustment. But we weren't really familiar with it yet because we didn't need to be. So that session took 90 minutes. So we're going to see what today does. I'm going to hang out until we've taken care of everybody's questions and we've answered the different circumstances, things you've run into. Some of you have sent me some things in advance. I'm going to do a little bit of a reminder. For some of you, it's going to be, oh, what do we say? Brand new. And for others, it's just let's get to the point that we know, that we know, that we know. And here's one of the things that I can tell you. I'm sitting here, Mark Scully's in the room with me here in Sterling Heights. He's like, oh, geez. Yeah, you got mentioned, buddy. The nemesis. Mark's been great because if ever I got things that I want to bounce or he's got things that he wants to bounce, I got to tell you, it's great feedback and communication. So Mark actually threw a scenario to me that it's like, hey, what about in this case? Now I'll tell you, I think it's going to be rare for most of us, but again, one of the things we've talked about is let's be prepared for everything. So with all that said, here we go with the first basic reminder. What's changed? And the answer to that is real simple. And this is the old KISS principle. Keep it simple, salespeople. There's no longer compensation offered in the MLS. Now, if we still happen to be like part of the MI Real Source, we still have it, I think, until the 13th. So look, let's just pretend that it really doesn't exist. But for those who don't have it, you can benefit these guys that still do because they're in here getting prepared for when it is pulled. So that's the first part. Two things have changed. What's no longer advertised in the MLS. I want you to think about this. Do we even really need to know what the offer of compensation is? Do we as agents need to know that? No, you don't have to answer that. I just want you to think about this on your own. The answer would be no. But now, some of you, I've been going around and we've done the agency course. And I ask, what are your fiduciary responsibilities? Okay. Now, again, this is just be aware because if you have to start going, well, wait a minute, well, Darwin, you gave us an acronym one time to help me remember that. But if you got to think about it, that's not a good thing. Because how do we practice what we do? Well, here's one of them. It's called reasonable care due diligence. So we don't really need to know. But is it to the benefit of the buyer to know what the offer of compensation is? And the answer is yes. It is your fiduciary duty to inform the buyer of any compensation being offered or concession. And on one hand, concession should be directly related to closing cost, taxes, prepaids, any other allowable expense. Compensation be the buyer broker fee. And of course, we're saying compensation. That's what a seller also pays us as a listing broker. It's compensation. So could a concession become compensation? Could. It's called negotiation. So we're going to remember that. First thing that's changed, keeping this simple, compensation is no longer listed on the MLS. Second thing that's changed, the settlement has required that we get an agreement signed. So now the reason I'm impressing upon that, it's get an agreement signed prior to touring homes with a buyer you're working with. Now that basically means you're showing homes, you better have an agreement. Now, this is educating the public. This is not law. It's part of the agreement under how we will practice. How do I put this? Let's see. If I'm a smart agent and I want to make sure I get paid, what will I want to make sure is addressed in this agreement? And what type of agreement would it be? Answer? My commission. Whoops, see, it still comes out. My compensation. I want to make sure it's addressed that I have an agreement that says if I show a house, I get paid if they buy that house. That's really what we're talking about. So, guys, to an extent, this is not a change. This is what we should have been doing since 1995 when they rolled out agency disclosure. Because we were supposed to be disclosing our agency relationship prior to the exchange of any confidential information. And here's what we know, we haven't done that. By the way, that's the entire state of Michigan and all the other states that embraced it in 1995 or before. So it's the way we should have been practicing, because if I disclose my agency that buyer I represent you, what automatically follows? What's the next thing they sign? This is where you guys can participate. The buyer agency contract, right? So that's the key. So those are the only two things that have changed. So that being good, and nobody having any questions, I'm going to get rid of that. Because if that's all that's changed, it's what issues has it created for us. So let's get very, very basic. If that's all that's changed, has how we got compensated changed? Has it changed from where we can get paid? So let's answer this question. I put it up here. Where can we get our compensation from? And this is, go ahead and for those that are out there, I want you to type it into the chat session. I got my buddy Michael here. Michael's hitting it. I'd be really curious, what are the 3 sources that you guys can receive compensation from? 3 places. And it hasn't changed. Okay? Good. Wow. Richmond just nailed it right up front. You know how to, because that's right in the window where that would pop up, but it is. Okay, so where have we always got it from, guys? Go ahead, you can slip through. I don't know if it's on there. Where do we always get it? This is your turn, guys. Where do we always get it from?
Seller broker.
A commission we always got from our broker. They answered it actually correctly with the way I hit it. We actually received our commission from our listing broker, from our broker, right? And I just kind of slipped as to where the primary place that by contract, how are we always guaranteed compensation? Through the MLS, right? And if that is the MLS, that was the listing broker, okay? So I want you to really hang on to that, because the simplicity in the future and how you have to operate is based upon what we've always done. So because of the MLS and our participation within it, or MLS is where the data share is at, when we submitted it, that was the guarantee of compensation should the seller accept any, we'll call it accept any offer. We would get paid blank percent of whatever that listing broker was offered. Now, what everybody thought was the seller paid it. It was the listing broker. What did the closing statement show? It was the seller. Seller didn't do it. Seller paid the listing broker paid us. They just built it into the transaction. But it's imperative that we know and understand that the way that it always happened was through the listing broker. What's the second place that we can get compensated? From the buyer. Okay? The buyer could, if they chose to, pull money right out of their pocket and go, here's all of your money. Here's what I owe you, right? Now that's a simple one. Did it happen a lot? Nope. Nope. Didn't really happen a lot. Matter of fact, most of the time it happened, it was when we were dealing with a for sale by owner, a FSBO, because the for sale by owner wasn't offering compensation. And by the way, it's important we know this, because when we go, oh my God, how do I handle this? Well, just reverse it. How did you handle it when it was reversed? Because that's what we're in a point of. So the buyer could have always paid it. And of course, what was the third source? The seller. So here's the key to this. These three things haven't changed. Wait a minute. So really, it's business as usual. But because it's no longer advertised in the MLS, it's no longer guaranteed through the MLS, we've got to figure out the way that works best so that we get our compensation. Everybody's good with that? I'm kind of trying to watch it chatting up, and I got Michael watching for me also. So let's go here. Because as we move now, with all of us having to deal with this, question becomes, how should we get our compensation knowing that it hasn't changed? What's going to be the easiest way for us to be able to do it? Well, if the compensation is coming through the listing broker, compensation coming from the listing broker, who knows what has been created to get signed to make sure that we have certainty of payment? Anybody know what it's called? There it is. Cheryl's holding it up for us. And Cheryl's holding up what has been named the Cooperating Broker Compensation Agreement. Cooperating Broker Compensation Agreement, abbreviated. So, simplicity. I'm going to get it from the listing broker. I need this agreement. Okay? And keep it that simple. And I know some of you have been having to deal with this. We're not going to go there yet. All right? If it's the buyer, how have I got it covered that I'm already guaranteed to get payment? What's my promise of payment? I have my exclusive buyer agency. Right to represent, exclusive buyer contract, whatever you want to call it. But I have that agreement already signed with the buyer. When did I get it signed? Before I ever showed them a house. Okay? Now, so they're simple. If it's coming directly from the buyer, I have an agreement signed that says they are going to pay me. If it's the seller, can I get it directly from the seller? Have we done it in the past? Yes. And we did one-party agreements. Could you still do that? Yes. But the property is listed. Can you get a one-party agreement with somebody else's seller? No. Wow, that creates a problem. But let's keep it simple. Here, as I know, this is an option. So if we keep these three things in mind, I just got to make sure that I have the paperwork in place to be able to make sure that happens. Okay? So let's then take this next step. I want to introduce you to our paperwork. Because here is where everything starts. So this is our exclusive listing contract. what you're going to see, there are no changes to page 1. Page 1 is exactly the same. Okay? Just keep it simple. There are going to be some words, but I'm going to go in the big picture. No changes here. This is the one thing that had to be added is in paragraph 4. This was required verbiage that has to be part of the paperwork, which simply says broker's fee for services rendered is not fixed, controlled, or recommended by law, the MLS, or any person not a party to this agreement. Okay? So here is one question. What are we as a company going to do? We want full compensation. We want to offer compensation. So I'm going to put 6. I'm going to offer 3. Ideally, that's what I want the seller to do from a point of marketing. What we believe as a company is that a home is more saleable when they are offering compensation to pay for the buyer's broker. And I'll show you that. Don't let me forget my 4 houses. Okay? So that's what we're doing. Now, here's another change. Right here, this, we have never had part of the agreement, but it was like, well, wait a minute, let's just make that happen. I'm going to just highlight it so you can see it. We've always had this as a fee. The $195 just hadn't been part of the agreement. Now it's in there. No surprise to a landlord when that comes up at the time of closing on a lease. Here's the other part. Only on the lease. Only on the lease. Yeah. Okay. So, well, we can talk more. If not, you guys get with your manager. But let's see. Paragraph 5, slightly worded. It's a little bit more detail to it. But in the end, it is D, where there is the opportunity where a seller is going to say, I do not, will not, want not offer compensation. Okay? We do all the things that we can do, handling all the ways that we are going to learn to handle this, we'll call it objection. And they say, nope, don't offer compensation. Well, they're going to initial D. Okay? But are we still going to cooperate? Yes. Can we offer cooperation to a buyer's broker? Yes. Can we offer cooperation to a transaction coordinator? Yes. But what would be the difference is we're going to put zeros in here because there would be no compensation offered, but we are cooperating. There's a difference between cooperation and compensation, always has been. All right. Seller concessions. Here's the reason I highlighted this. This is not too much of a change, but it is new. A seller can offer 3%. They could offer 6%. This is saying, yes, I authorize you as a brokerage firm to advise potential buyers and their agents that the seller may be willing to consider concessions. And this invitation shall or shall not be disclosed on the MLS. That is concessions. Not an offer of compensation to the buyer's broker. And there is a difference. Okay? So that's important that we understand that portion. We have concessions. Could a 3% concession be used for a buyer broker fee? Yes. It's called negotiation. Part of a purchase agreement. Okay? But this is simply, I'm authorizing you to do it. And yes, you can authorize and place that into the MLS. They would authorize us to place it into the MLS. Now, there's then the participation in the MLS that we are able to do that. I got a question here. Question is are both MLSs? What I've been told, I will share with you, in talking with Realcom head, Karen was not really excited about doing it. However, it sounded like all of the participants that we are data sharing with was going to do it, therefore they went along with it. So based on that conversation, I'm guessing that everybody that's part of the GLR data share is going to have that in there. Okay, so concessions, and here's the biggest concern for this, guys. This is why not all of them were excited about doing it. What likely are all real estate agents going to put in as concessions? Whatever they were offering for compensation. So it's like, well, what's the issue? Well, you just renamed it. And so we're talk to your sellers and see what they want to do. Either way, what I know is if I see, and this is where we have to think, this is negotiation. So this is where our skills got to become very, very keen. If a seller's offering 2% in concessions, I got 2% that I can work with. I could take 2% off the purchase price. I could use that 2% toward, maybe it's 1% toward closing costs. Maybe it's I just take the 2% and I go toward buyer broker fee. Either way, if a buyer owes me 3, we're going to make sure that we get paid. But we go back to the point of fiduciary duty. Let's make sure the buyer knows what's being offered, because that can be used anywhere the buyer wants it to be used. So this is, don't get stuck on buyer broker fee. Don't get stuck on closing costs. Don't get stuck that it's a concession or that you gotta, we'll talk more about that, okay? But we are just getting that participation, or that okay to participate by advertising the listing in the MLS and of course all the other places that it will go. Another change is home surveillance. Just one that we saw that it was on the different listing contracts from GMAR, from MAR, from Realcom. It made sense that we just make sure that they know that if you got surveillance equipment, as it puts here, may result in the violation of state or federal criminal wiretapping statutes. So just beware, seller, we told you, okay? Letters of introduction, as we know, that is one that has been out there. Should we, shouldn't we? This is covering our backside. So it's just saying, if we were to receive one, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you're either telling me to deliver it to you or you're telling me not to. And it explains the reasons why. Okay? So that is the listing contract. Michael, anything show up on chat for questions about that?
Doorbells included?
Doorbells would likely be included. Of course, we should be warning them anyway because that's the most common one. It's the only one I have in my house that would record anything. Now, I don't, but where do people often go? Outside, and then they start talking, and often it's right there at the front door still. So we should be aware of that anyway, but this is making sellers aware of it, okay? Let's move to the buyer agency contract then. Here's the first change to this. Now we're saying you buy a house, state of Michigan, we get paid. Okay, matter of fact, what do we always have to do? If you heard me in any training, I always said as you fill that out, be generally specific. Because here's the key. Oh, matter of fact, everybody, real close attention right here. Eyes, ears too. I got everybody? I know I got everybody here. I want you to think of any existing buyer representation contract that you have? It's, I'm surprised I have to ask this, but I know it exists. What does it state that you get paid? If it says 0 or it's left blank, you are working for nothing. Because all you can get paid is what your contract says. If you have an existing contract that's left blank, or you've been one of those that you've always put 0, that's what you get paid. You need to go out and get an updated listing or buyer agency contract. You need to get it updated. What if I don't have one? You're violating the terms of the agreement. And guess how much you get paid? See, the only way, who's paying us? It's the buyer. Nobody else is a party to what we're going to get paid as a buyer's agent. That contract is your money. You cannot take more than what that contract says. You can only take what you've signed up for. Okay? That's the reason that it's just simple. Hey, any real property located in Michigan, that's real estate. Okay? Now, what if I get one of those buyers who's like, look, I just want to see the damn house. Okay? Can we anticipate that's happening? Okay. And we run, but I got to have an agreement. I'm not going to sign an agreement. I can't show you the house. Well, listen, is it that you don't really want to be tied having to work with me? Yeah, I just don't want to be tied. But listen, if I show this house, will you buy it? Or if you buy it, will you buy it from me? That's a really good and important qualifying question. Yes. Well, then the only way I can do it is if you'll sign an agreement to make sure that I get paid. So this is where I've got to have my own personal standards. I've got to be willing to walk away if they won't sign an agreement. 2 reasons. I don't want to violate the terms of this agreement. I want to get paid. So if they agree, I'm going to put the property address. If I'm going to go show them 3 or 4 homes, I'm going to put those 3 or 4 property addresses. If they buy one of those, this says, I'm your agent on these properties. Could they go to someone else on all the other properties? Yes, they could. Just something we're going to have to deal with, and we wanted to be prepared for it. Okay? Now, Michael, I see a couple more on there. Anything that's surrounding this one? All right. Okay, so let's move to the next one. So compensation. Broker's fees for services rendered are not fixed. Control that basic statement. Broker may not receive compensation for brokerage services provided to the buyer from any source that exceeds the amount agreed upon. That has to be in there. Okay. Let's see. It exceeds written amount of broker. In consideration of services to be performed under the contract or this agreement, buyer agrees to pay broker as follows. There's only one thing. We're getting a % of the purchase price or a flat amount plus the $395. If it's a lease, it's the $195. Compensation is due and payable upon closing, provided, however, the transaction does not close because of any default on the part of the buyer. The compensation shall become immediately due and payable. Compensation obligations shall apply to any purchase agreements executed during the term of this agreement or during an extension of this agreement. We don't need 6-month buyer representation agreements. Probably 30 to 60 days. They can always be extended. You just have to amend this. Compensation obligation will also apply to any purchase agreements executed within, same as a listing. Do at least 6 months. After the expiration and termination of this agreement, if the property acquired was presented to the buyer during the term of this agreement. So there's your compensation. Little changes to it, but all the same in reality. And then it's credit that we get. And here's what it states. Buyer will receive a credit against any amount owed pursuant to paragraph 4 for compensation paid to broker by seller or seller's listing broker. Which will take us back to this. If I'm getting my money, my compensation from the listing broker, what do I have to have? A signed, from the listing broker, a signed agreement that we've called cooperating broker compensation agreement. When do I want to have that? No later than prior to sending the offer to the listing agent. Now, you can already start to see that's a problem. Because one, I got to find out compensation, if they're even offering it. Two, send it to the listing agent, have it get signed and back to me before I even show it would be preferred. But I get the call, yep, we're offering compensation, yep, we'll do 3%. I go, great, I go show the property because I'd already sent it over to them. My buyer loves it. It's a great property, it's a hot property. I haven't got this contract, this agreement back from the listing broker or listing agent yet. Now I got an offer in my hand that must be presented, but yet I don't have a guarantee of my compensation yet. Sure, but what if you don't get it back? Because again, all digital signatures are now viable. Well, but have you got a signed contract that they're going to pay you?
Before we send in the offer.
Can you send it over, but if they don't send it back? So the answer is yes. Could I send it through email using Transaction Desk or Remind Docs Plus? Answer is yes. But what if they don't send it back? What's your guarantee of payment?
If they are not willing to pay compensation or?
So the question here is, if they don't send it back, does that mean that they're not willing to pay compensation? They said they were, but I don't have that agreement. So what's my guarantee of payment if I never get it? The only thing that you've got is your buyer representation agreement. But the buyer ain't got enough money to pay money out of pocket. Ruh-roh. You're starting to see the problem with this. Because guys, here's this, some of you, if you've been really in tune with me, you know that what I said is, I believe that we're going to work with the buyer to get the money from the seller. And that what we would do is to build it into the purchase agreement. Now, that sounds difficult with what I just said. But what's the difference between asking for 3% toward a buyer broker fee or asking for 3% toward closing cost, taxes, prepaids, any other allowable expense? There is none, is there? Don't complicate the simple that we have done over all these years. Now, if you're newer to the business, Jay, you're going, what are you even talking about? Because you couldn't ask for concessions because every house has got 4 offers on it, plus, right? Well, we're not going to be able to live in that. But here's the other part. What do we know that are all agents showing buyers homes looking for compensation? They all got it. They're all going to have it. And you've heard me, Jay, you won't remember this, but you guys are out here old enough, you'll remember Ragu. I mean, it's still out there, but they had an old tagline. You remember it? They talked about all this stuff. It's in there. So you see, nothing's changed. The compensation for both the listing broker and the buyer broker, when a transaction happens, it's in there. Okay? So it's in there, always has been, always will be. What this settlement has forced us to do is to figure out how we do it differently. Okay? Now hold that thought. Because we're going to address how to with the purchase agreement.
Two questions. Scott, Paula.
Okay?
Paula says, if I phoned the listing agent and he said they were paying 3%, but I do not have the signed compensation form,
I'll keep going. You're good.
then I would have to ask the buyer to sign the buyer agent form.
Yeah, so Paula, that's actually a great one. So here's what we got. I will tell you that I am aware of two companies. One is EXP. They have apparently been told, we will not pay compensation. As a listing broker, we will not pay compensation. It is also my understanding, oh, that's loud. It's my understanding that Berkshire Hathaway Key, they're not going to offer. So if you send over the cooperating broker compensation agreement, you won't get it because they've set a directive for their companies. We're not going to pay listing broker compensation. Therefore, what's left over? That's weird. Sorry if you're hearing that because it's even worse here, you guys. We're either going to get it from the buyer or we're going to get it from the seller. Now we'll talk about how to be able to do that. But what they did is they've taken away one option. Don't panic. You call them, hey, is there compensation built in? Yes, but you're going to have to get it from the buyer or the seller. But the compensation, if it's not, it's from the, hold that, we're going to address it. What was the other one you had from Scott?
Does a text with offer of buyer compensation enough to get paid?
Oh, Scott, I know you know that answer, so thank you for asking. Because we were kind of directing that in here. So if I text Schmo over at EXP, hey, are you offering compensation? Yes, we're offering 3%. Are you guaranteed payment because you got that text? No, 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 no. I want you to think of that. Even if think of this, compensation, yes, 3%. You see it in the MLS. Or no, oops, I used the wrong word, didn't I? Concession, 3%. Now let's use that toward closing cost taxes prepaid. Is it guaranteed? No. Matter of fact, if they said we're leaving the stove, refrigerator, washer, dryer, microwave, disposal, the boat out in the lake, the hot tub, pool table, is it staying with the property? Thanks, Mark. Mark says yes, no, maybe. And all three would be correct. Because how are they going to be included? If it's where? On the purchase agreement. You see, it's the buyer's offer. And have we done that before? Common practice. This is not new. And this is what I want everybody to understand. We've always had to negotiate appliances. There's some personal property. We've all had to negotiate. Have we not negotiated concessions in the past? Yes. And our compensation, it's in there. You just got to make sure it gets in there. Okay?
Another one for you.
Got another one.
Valerie wants to know, explain why we need the MLS if they are no longer insuring broker to broker compensation.
That was what everybody's worry was. Well, it's called what really outside of Great question, really. What outside of broker compensation, what has and continues to do for the MLS? It is the primary marketing source for you to market your property to sell your homes that you list. It is a primary place that you can go to be able to find properties. And if you're, well, I know how y'all work.
They could go
How-
to Zillow and do that.
Where's Zillow getting their information?
But
Thank you very much. Where are all the other websites getting it? From the MLS. Well, they could call Zillow. They could call coldwellbanker.com. Guys, Zillow. Okay. All right. So, guys, it's up to you. I challenge you. Go ahead and do your business, not have the MLS. Try it. Try it. So the bottom line is, it's the marketing tool. You pay a few dollars to market your property. Who's been in this business for as long as me? 30, yeah, Mark, how long? 27 years, that counts. Because it was prior to technology. How much did you pay for an inline ad in the newspaper? 80 bucks? I was in Muskegon, Michigan, it was 50 to 80. And it was about this long. How long did it last? No, one day. One day, because the next day there was another paper coming out. And we're worried as, what, is it 42 bucks? So what's its value? Think about how often you use it. So if it's not RealComp, if it's not MI RealSource, what is it going to be? So guys, it's a marketing tool. As a matter of fact, where do you market your property to more than any place else? Realtors. Who to? Realtors. I'm not asking where people are using it. I'm going, where are they marketing it to? What's responsible more than anything else? 85% of homes that list, or excuse me, 85% of the buyers who buy a home working with a realtor. Where are they first exposed to? Lots of places out on the internet. So guys, huge value yet to the MLS. It wasn't because of the guarantee being the only reason we would use it. We used it because that's how we market the property. It's the primary source. Okay? So yeah, come up, guys, it's marketing. $42 a month. Was there any others? That's it. Okay. So compensation just says, buyer, you're going to get credit, anything I get. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to consult my buyer to help them understand that the best way for them to see that I get paid is through the seller, and that's done between the buyer and the seller as part of a purchase agreement.
The house buyer is gonna ask the seller through the agent. That's the point
Yeah.
here.
How is the buyer going to ask the seller through the agent? Buyer's going to ask the seller through the purchase agreement, but I'm going to, if you will, guys, we can't think in the vein of how we've worked with buyers in the past. Were you here on that day where Mark taught me? So let- Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah. So let me clarify for everybody what the question is here, because obviously what we're leading you to is the best and easiest way to get your compensation is for the buyer to build it into their purchase agreement. Now, here, I need you to hear that very specifically. It's by the buyer building it into their purchase agreement. Okay? So then the question comes up was what's different, because I can tell you you're probably like about 75% of the agents. We always thought that we could never negotiate our compensation as part of the purchase agreement. We can't, but the buyer can. Now, the understanding was, and I'm going to say, let me call it a misunderstanding as to why we all have thought that way, was because what we could really not negotiate as part of the terms of a purchase agreement was the amount of compensation offered from the listing broker as part of the purchase agreement. Now, my friends here at AAA North, those that have joined us with Roe, you may not have got the full education, but what was one of the things if we ever had a shortfall on compensation? How did we get the additional shortfall if we chose to get it? The buyer chose to put the additional percentage into the purchase agreement. So if we were only getting 2 and we had a contract for 3, we'd accept the 2 from the listing broker, and the buyer would say, seller to pay buyer broker's fee of 1% of the purchase price. Now, you may not have ever done that, but that was fine, that was legal, that was the buyer's decision. So we always could have. It just wasn't necessary because 95% of the time we took the amount of money offered as compensation from the listing broker, and we never had to deal with it. But now buyers are going to be fully informed. So as we move forward, guys, what I would throw out to you, we can't think about how we've worked with buyers in the past. We have to think without now how we must work with buyers in the present and future. Because how are you going to get somebody to sign a contract when you've never met them? You can't do what you've done before. Nobody's going to sign a contract. You won't ever sign, you won't ever show homes. You have to handle it from a point where you get the, I like you, I trust you, respect you. I'll sign it. Now, how do you do that? You have to spend time with them prior to. Now, that means we got to change our skills, but we can all do that. We just got to learn how. It's why so many of you are on here today, because we're recognizing what we really do need to do, probably recognizing, as a matter of fact, that it's like, wait a minute, I really don't know how to do this. And everything starts with that awareness. Therefore, how am I going to do this? Okay, so let me continue. This is all the same. And again, we're looking at the exclusive buyer agency agreement. This is fully new. This is your fiduciary responsibilities to your buyer principal. So if you didn't know them before, now on the exclusive right to represent the buyer, these are your duties. These are the things that you will be doing for a buyer whom you represent. If they sign this, you represent them, and you owe them these fiduciary responsibilities. Even addresses the aspect of what if it's a dual agent. And we all understand dual agency. Something in my eye. Guys, when I come to your office to do an agency course, please show up. We have no idea how much we really don't understand agency. So that is the agency contract. Anything more pertaining to that one? All right. So let's go to the purchase agreement. Page 1. Oh, by the way, on all of these, I believe we wiped out the facsimile number on all of them. It's like, we don't need a fax. Okay? All the same, all the same, all the same. However, we've come to the reality. I was calling for it 6 weeks ago. I just, with everything that I was seeing, I'm going, we're not going to easily get our compensation from a listing broker, that we need to change our focus off of compensation from a listing broker, that the buyer is getting it from the seller, that the buyer is making it part of their offer. The buyer is ultimately responsible. Okay? We've discussed a few of the issues that we're going to run into already, that there will be sellers that won't offer compensation. Okay? Going to happen. Where we get it from? Buyer's going to get it from the seller most of the time. Buyer's not going to pull it out of their pocket, although there are people that can and will. Okay? Therefore, they'll build it into the purchase agreement. It's the only way it's going to work. We're going to have the situations where we send it over because we know the compensation is available and they don't send it back. And we could go through other scenarios, but the bottom line becomes this. The buyer needs to know so that they can have a negotiating strategy knowing that the seller's offering compensation. But they're still responsible. So what's the best way for me to consult the buyer is to simply tell them, look, you know, in the past, we've always been compensated by the listing broker through the MLS. that's no longer guaranteed payment. So you're truly needing to make sure that you understand how I get paid. We're having difficulty finding brokers that will actually offer the compensation directly, paying it themselves. So the easiest way for us to do this, we found, is for you to be able to build it into your purchase agreement, asking the seller to pay it. Any questions?
So what kind of amount we should put there in that purchase agreement?
Okay.
That's the amount which we're looking for.
Yeah. So this is, so guys, the question was, is what kind of language should we put in the purchase agreement? This is going to be your new purchase agreement. Paragraph 5, I've literally been sitting here this morning doing all of the personalization for each company, AAA North, Rowe, SACMAR, Town and Country, Coldwell Banker Professionals, so that they can get submitted today, tomorrow at the latest, so that they will all be updated. But the key was, one, we wanted to make sure that we had enough eyes on it. We haven't missed anything. 2, that you guys were aware of it. So the managers will be taking and getting a hold of everybody else, make sure everybody's aware that these are coming. So if you're part of transaction desk, we know that they're still backed up, probably 3 to 4 weeks, but we'll have fillable forms for you. Otherwise, this verbiage will also be in clauses. And when I use the term clauses, if you're going, I would make sure I get with a mentor or my manager to be able to find out how to use those. Because then it's just click and it drops in and you fill in the blank. Okay? But this will be available to you ASAP. And if nothing else, it should be in the clauses. Okay? Now, the other part to the purchase agreement then that you will see is that the $395 as part of this, because it's saying, again, following amounts will be payable to your office. Check, check. You're going to check the 2 boxes. I'm going to put that it's 3%, or in the event that there was a flat fee, because you can do that also, you'd put it in there. And then you're checking that the buyer also is paying the $395. So seller will contribute, and by the way, I want you to hear this and I'll come back to you. Seller shall contribute blank dollars or blank percent of the purchase price to be credited toward buyer's broker fee. That applies directly to what the listing contract, what the buyer representation contract says, and it fits for the settlement. It's a change from what we had before, but it does fit for the settlement. No, because if I'm thank you, Mark, because I forgot I was going to have to address this. Okay. So Mark just said, but it negates the aspect for the broker to broker. It does if you fill it in. Otherwise, I leave it unchecked and I put 0 because I'm getting compensation from the listing broker.
We fill this out without knowing what the listing broker is offering, if there's an offer.
So the question is coming up. He's in the back of the room, so I'll reiterate. So we're going to complete this. We may not know if there's any compensation offered.
We've got a buyer broker agreement for 2%. And we would then put the 2% in there.
Correct. So we put a fee in that we have an agreement to that is right here.
This negates the broker-to-broker compensation and the possible benefit of the extra percent to the buyer.
No, because I get 3%. So what again, Mark, I know where you're going now. Okay. So Mark brought up the aspect of what if I was silly enough to offer 2% on my buyer representation agreement. Sorry, I love y'all. And then come to find out the seller was offering 3%. Or the listing broker. Either way, it's the same money. That would have been a benefit to the buyer. Well, that goes back to the point of what we were saying. We need to find out if any compensation is being offered and how much and how is it being paid. So all of those things are to the benefit of the buyer, because if they know, it could work in their financial favor, or it's going to be built into the compensation. Now, by the way, I want you to notice, these amounts will be credited toward the buyer's obligations to the selling broker. The selling broker is waiving any cooperating offers of compensation up to the amount the seller is contributing toward buyer's broker fee. So I just said, Mark, this kind of goes on what we were talking about earlier, for the dishonest ones. It just told the seller that if they thought they were paying the compensation to the listing broker, and the listing broker to the buyer's broker, we just said, by the way, we're waiving anything that they've got. This is how we're doing it. It's the same 3%. Again, I'm going to tell you, don't complicate it, guys. Keep it simple. Thank you guys for being so, you can't, these guys are all wearing it on their shoulders in here. Go ahead.
This is only in Michigan.
No, this is everywhere. The settlement is everywhere. It is the National Association of Realtors.
Point A to point B. It was clear, there was commission, the seller.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Now you are making to make big circles around.
Oh,
For
so
what?
let me tell you what's going on here, guys, so that you get it. I'm just gonna say it. Piss and moan, piss and moan, piss and moan. It's not gonna get us anywhere, and we've all done it. And that's what we were just doing in here. Guys, there's nothing we can do. The settlement has happened. It's impacted all of us. And here's the thing, remember this. This didn't impact us directly. This impacted every consumer in the United States of America.
But the Congress and the Senate, they didn't approve it.
Oh, it won't be approved.
The
No, no.
president, he didn't allow
No.
that.
President's not going to approve it. There's no governor that's going to approve it. This, and see, that's what, I'm so glad you brought it up. Guys, this is not law. Might it become law? Yes, but this is an agreement through a court case, class action
What
lawsuit.
you make the Supreme Court? Spend more money. So
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
keep it like this.
So,
legally.
so I'm just going to move on, because the bottom line, we aren't going to do anything about it unless we step up to the level of NAR, and you can convince everybody in power at NAR that that's the thing to do when they've already decided and signed off.
Nobody.
Okay, guys, I gotta stay focused. I gotta stay focused. There's no sense in us discussing it in this room or on this call. Everybody know that. It ain't gonna change.
Darwin, I have a
It
question.
happened. So I'm
Darwin.
gonna move on. Go ahead, Deanna.
Okay, forget the NAR stuff. Can I be as simplistic as saying to my buyers that forget all this crazy talk? Here's what it is. You are responsible for my compensation and you will be reimbursed at the end of the contract.
No,
I mean, you can't just say that. I mean, essentially that's
Nope.
what's happening.
nope. Well, how am I gonna get reimbursed?
You can't guarantee that you're going to be reimbursed.
Yeah, I can.
Yes, you can by
How?
the
If you
contract,
don't
the
know-
purchase agreement.
Yeah,
In the
but you
purchase
can't
agreement.
tell your buyers that they're going to be reimbursed.
Well, that's what we already said, but how can I guarantee it? Because the buyer will build it into their purchase agreement.
That's
So
what
it
I'm
was really
saying.
just, and so Deanna, there's just a small change in the word that you use. It's not that
Reimbursed.
I'm going to get reimbursed.
Okay.
What you're going to do, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, is build it into your purchase agreement, asking the seller to pay the compensation. That's simple. Okay, you gotta keep it that simple.
So this paragraph 5 does that.
Yep. Paragraph
Okay.
5 and paragraph 6. Those two
Okay.
combined take care of that. Because paragraph 6, anything I get from you, or well, excuse me, anything I get from the listing broker or the seller gets credited toward that amount.
And
So
that
what
would
we're
mean
going to
that
do, Mr.
last,
Buyer, go ahead.
that last in seller concession,
Yep.
any other allowable expenses would be ours. Because obviously we're not going to get any compensation from the purchase price being lowered or some type of
Okay, I gotta
proration
go
or,
back. I
yeah.
forgot which agreement I'm on. So let me go back. So back here on the buyer representation contract is where we're addressing the compensation. I get paid a full compensation. Anything that I get from the listing broker or the seller gets credited toward that amount.
Okay.
Okay, so that's where it's addressed. Then matter of fact, while I'm sitting with the buyer addressing this, I let them know the best way that we've found to get my compensation is to build it right into your purchase agreement.
And then they're going to ask,
buyers
are we paying for it? You know, it's very convoluted.
Sure.
Darwin, got a question.
Yep. But hold on for just a second. I want everybody to see. Look, who paid it before?
Seller.
It was the sellers. I can argue this. It was the buyer. I can argue this. It was the listing broker. The reality, it was because there was a transaction.
And you're
They had to
saying
show
that
somebody paid it.
you're saying that this isn't going to affect our offers on multiple offer situations because everybody's in the same boat.
Oh, I love that you just asked it that way, Deanna. And the answer is yes. That is exactly what I'm saying. And I'll prove it. First
Yeah,
part,
but no, wait a minute. Yes, it will affect it if you have multiple offers, because if you sit there and one offer says the seller's going to compensate me my 3% that I owe for my buyer broker, but somebody says, oh no, you only have to do 2%, that's going to be a decision that's going to be made. So you can't say
Okay.
that that's not going to reflect on that.
well, that's not what I'm saying. You just used two different amounts. Guys, if I made an offer previously on concessions for closing costs, was that going to impact the offer? Yes. Well, it's going to impact it now. Is it going to impact it if I charge my buyer 3 and somebody else is charging them 1? Yes.
Yes, yes.
I'm not talking about the amounts. We're getting stuck on how it gets handled. So, guys, I'm worth my 3%. I know what I do. I know my value. When I'll tell you what, the day when I retire and I start selling real estate and I can actually represent buyers the way that we should, I'll ask for 5% on a buyer.
Okay, so Darwin, when I'm submitting an offer and there's 5 offers, you're saying essentially every one of those offers could have a different compensation agreement.
Oh, totally. Totally and absolutely. And we
So
won't
it
know
is
what
gonna-
everybody else is doing.
That's what I'm
So-
saying. It will affect
So it is
it.
going to affect the offers.
Okay, you
'Cause
guys
if mine's not as
listen,
if mine's not as
listen.
good as the other
Will the
one.
amount, hold on. Let me just be really quick so that we can get off of this, because we're beating a dead horse right now. It's too obvious, and we're not addressing the amount. We're not addressing the amount. We all know that will make a difference, right? We're talking about how are we building in and how are we getting paid. So if you signed up for 3, you signed up for 3, get your 3.
But it all is encompassed in the same deal. I mean, how can you say that?
I can't, sure. Okay,
All right, go ahead. Go on.
let's move off of how much you're compensating.
But that's
Is
not the point. The
everybody
point
building-
she's trying to make is how offers are going to be
Yes.
viewed.
Yeah, I'm
That's
not
what
talking
she's
about amount.
asking.
Well, no,
I'm
we're
talking about
talking
5
2 things.
different
How is
ways.
it going to be viewed and what the amount is? I've already agreed with you. Guys, I got to move on because I'm not talking about the amount. I agree with you. The amount will impact which offer they take. How it's built in will not, because it's the bottom line.
Darwin, I have a question
I didn't want
regarding,
to go there with that part. So,
Darwin, I
okay,
have a
next
question
question.
regarding the language you used.
Yes,
So
on the
going
purchase
back
agreement?
to, yes, the purchase agreement. You say that the seller shall contribute towards
Yep.
the buyer's broker fee. In the listing agreement, you gave the seller the option to not offer that.
Correct.
Right.
My question is, if you put it in the purchase agreement that they will, does that negate the need for concessions? Or do you see where I'm going with the language?
Yeah, yeah, and guys, listen, I know we're all frustrated. And occasionally new ones will come at me. So what I want to throw out, everybody, look, we're all family. We'll have our heated discussions, we'll have our disagreements, but in the end, we're all moving in the same direction with the same things. So to address, Valerie, what you just mentioned, the listing contract has nothing to do with what we offer or how we get our compensation, because we're not, on one side, we're not part of the listing contract. So let me draw the analogy again, and I'm going to keep using concessions. In the past, were concessions readily offered?
Yes.
The answer is no.
Oh,
Okay. Did we still make the offer asking for concessions? The answer is
Yeah.
yes. Nothing's changed. It's just now we got to deal with another number that's already in there. We just got to figure out how we're going to get compensated.
why even put D in that listing? Why even give them the opportunity for D?
Well, because there would be those like me who said, I'm not going to walk away from a 3% listing because the seller up front just can't grasp that they're going to get or have to pay, or somebody's going to build it into the transaction.
Okay.
So if a seller says, I don't want to offer compensation, and I can't convince them that for marketing purposes and for their bottom line, they'd actually get more money if they did, I'm taking the listing. And I'll offer 0, and y'all can say, hey, Darwin, what's up with that? I just got a seller that, regardless of what we looked at, they didn't want to offer compensation. Now, what is the agent going to do when they make an offer?
Work it into the PA.
Let me rephrase that. What is the buyer going to do to make sure that their agent gets paid? They're going to build it into the purchase agreement.
PA.
It's going to be in the PA. So again, as we discuss all of this,
Hi,
what
can I
I
get
hope
2
you're
salmon
seeing
meals, please?
is that it's just going to work in this direction because of all the things that we're
They're gonna be
discussing.
both the same, so 2 salmon with red skin potato.
Let's see. I gotta find
and,
Mario. Hold on a second. There's Mario. I'll get him. He's probably multitasking. Okay. So Valerie, did that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying on that too. I just wanted to make sure, because I know we're using, nomenclature interchangeably, yet distinctly.
Yeah. Yep. Let me see. So here's the other changes that will show in the purchase agreement when you get it. Everything that has like an impact upon the seller's finance, pretty much all in the same order now. So it goes money, 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 money. So we have moved up many of those things to be a part of this purchase agreement. So they're all together.
If the MLS has a yes for concession
If the MLS has a yes for concessions,
at a
specific number offered in it,
and our number on our buyer agency agreement is less than that concession number.
so
maybe
now
still
hold on,
get-
let me catch them up so that they hear. So the offer of concession that the buyer would then look at as, hey, can I use that for compensation? So if I had, again, offering it out at 2 and there was 3, could we put the 3% into this new section? The answer is no. And the reason being is I can only take what is offered, or I can only accept what has been agreed to in my buyer representation contract.
That in its case hurts our buyer.
No, because they should offer 1% less. So what was just here is that then with this, we're actually impacting the buyer. No, their buying strategy has to be an understanding that the seller was offering 3, but you're only having to pay me 2. Do you want to use that 1% toward closing costs? Or do you want to maybe just consider offering less? See, so that was kind of the discussion, and a great one. And this is part of where, as I've been working with everyone, don't break these things out. That's what I'm saying. Because here's, matter of fact, let's take previously, there was a 3% concession offer. I don't need concessions. What did I know I could do as a buyer? And how did I, as an agent, guide my buyer? You got 3% built in that you can take at least less than that because they're planning to pay. And guys, in the end, do we really know whether or not the seller got that additional 1%, or was it my buyer that got that 1%? The only way you're going to know that is that you were able to get negotiation. There was some back and forth. Otherwise, you'll never know if you got it for your buyer or not. So again, it's just in there. We're talking about how do we get paid?
It sure would be a lot easier if the seller would pay 3 and the buyer would pay 3, and we're just done with it.
Well, again, as we were frustrated in here with the federal government, well, listen, it's the bureaucrats and the attorneys that made a boatload of money. And that's what we're having to live with, because that's what they took away, thinking it's going to benefit the consumer. By the way, I will tell you that in the state of Washington, where they've already been having to deal with this, their broker compensation on the buyer went up. It went up. There went your cost savings to the buyer.
I'm a bestseller. I'm volunteer. Listing my house with you.
Yep. Seller
What has to
Seller
do-
voluntarily listing the house with me. Yep, I'm just giving it for these guys.
I'm offering 3% commission. I'm saying 3% to the seller agent and 3% buyer agent.
Yes.
What has to do with the lawsuit against that? I'm the one I'm saying. I'm putting it.
Okay, so again, we're talking about the lawsuit. I'm not gonna go there because it's done.
I'm the one I'm giving that. Nobody's.
Yeah, why did they? Because there was money to be made and the DOJ doesn't like realtors.
Just like you come here, he said, everybody, I'm gonna buy you a pizza. Now I'm gonna say,
Yeah.
no, this is not.
So
legal.
guys, again, there's no sense in beating a dead horse. It's
agree.
done. The horse is dead. We just gotta deal with it.
Kill the cow.
All right. Guys, that really is the change on the purchase agreement. Is that in the order? So there is no other change. The rest of it's pretty much all the same, changing some words, and that's about it. Okay. All right. How are we doing for it? Oh, wow. 114. Let me throw something out on how do I get a seller who, by the way, go back. Remember the settlement announcement came out in the wonderful media of the United States is going, yep, realtors are taking less. They can no longer force you to pay the buyer broker's fee. You only have to pay a blank amount, and brokers are going out of business and all. Remember all of that? Anybody feel any of that? Because that announcement's been out for now 9 months. I haven't felt any difference because of that. Here's the other part to remember. Our agreements, as they exist right now that you are using, have been compliant and already prepared. Have you had any problems? Because I haven't heard of any. So the only difference is those two things. Compensation is gone. Keep it simple. I can get it from the listing broker, I can get it from the seller, I can get it from the buyer. How do I make that happen? We just simplified it. Okay. Fiduciary responsibility, it's still beneficial for us to find out for the buyer how much compensation was offered. That should go into your negotiating strategy. Okay. So let me hit one thing, because what we're all thinking about right now is a current market. Guys, nothing has changed. Yes, we know we're going to charge more than what others will because they can't determine what their value is. They don't know what their value is as a buyer's agent. Matter of fact, they're probably not much more than an order taker. Okay, and they fill in the blanks. They don't know how to negotiate. They don't know how to represent the buyer. Okay, they might be lucky to get to the closing for that matter. So forgetting that, here's a key. How do I get the buyer, or excuse me, the seller to even offer compensation when they say, I'm not looking at it? You've been around long enough, you've seen this. And then it hit for a while where we couldn't use it. You know where I'm going if you're a Floyd Wickman fan. Okay? So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, understanding now that the buyer is responsible for seeing that I get paid, any money you offer as compensation, either through me or directly to the buyer, guys, it's education, educate the consumer. Keep it simple, salespeople. By the way, if you're uncomfortable and you can't explain this, you're going to have trouble. I can tell you that. Because they're going to see it all over your face. I'm going to go, so this is the way it's done. I'm going to say, you know how I always done it? It's through the listing broker. I can tell you it's because of this change. Probably the easiest way forward is going to be we're going to build it into your purchase agreement. Now, back to the aspect of the seller. I don't know if I really want to offer compensation because they got educated by that wonderful media. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I just want you to think about this. There are sellers that are out there that are offering 3%. There's some that are out there that are offering, say, 2.5%. And then there's people that are thinking the way you are. I don't want to offer anything. But understanding that the buyer is responsible for paying me. Let me ask you this. If you're a buyer and there's a homeowner that's actually offering to pay compensation for the buyer broker, and there's you, which one of these homes as a buyer would you not want to see? And in this case, that's your house. So, look, I'm happy to do it either way, but I believe your best marketing is when you're actually offering the compensation, because what you'd be forcing to have happen is the buyer to walk away from your house. Either that or they're going to come and ask you to pay for it anyway because they don't have the money to pull it out of their pocket. And if they don't have the money to pull it out of your pocket and you still insist on not offering any compensation, who knows how much it could cost you. So I don't care. It's up to you. You got the situations where Mark and I were talking about this. How about the seller who's offering no compensation? And again, this just food for thought, things to think about. I don't know, there's an answer for it clearly yet. Mark and I didn't really have one yesterday. Buyer comes to the house, no offer of compensation. They call you, the listing agent. Do you have to sign an agreement with them? Answer is no, because you're the listing broker. You represent the seller. And now that buyer says, I want to buy it. You are the listing agent. Well, but there's no agent. This is a scenario. This is what I'm going to create for you. What do? There was no compensation built in for working with a buyer. Yet, don't you deserve compensation to work with that buyer?
Build it into the purchase agreement.
Well, no, this is the point. They signed that I'm going to pay 3% with zero compensation. Another scenario why seller, it's not really smart. Because do you want me to show the property? You're forcing me to become a representative of the buyer, so I can get compensated by them. Again, back to the point of marketing. That's what they would, either that or you don't show it. Or, suck it up, buttercup. You're going to take care of both sides and make 3%. At this moment, at this time, this day, I can't tell you what's going to be the right thing to do. But be prepared for it. ready to
Darwin?
have that discussion, and we'll be thinking about it also. Yeah, go ahead, Deanna.
When I get this, I get the sense of, you've been using that word a lot, build it into the purchase agreement. When I tell my buyers, I'm going to build this into the purchase agreement,
Nope,
in
you're
my
not.
head,
You're
you're going to
not.
build it
Buyers.
into the purchase. However, the buyer is going to say to me, well, aren't I going to be paying for it either way? Because I
Yes.
think that's what they're going to say.
Yes.
Because they're going to think that somehow they're losing that 3% in their offer. They're
No.
either going to, that's how I relate it.
Well, don't relay it that way, or don't feel that way, because if you feel that way, that's how your buyer's going to feel.
But I
see,
guarantee that's what
truth
they're going to
always-
think.
I guarantee they won't unless if you do it. And listen, guys, I've had lots of, right, Mark, discussions on what will be. Look, I've thought a lot about it. I'll handle it when it comes up, and what I ask you guys to do, I'm a clearinghouse. Bring it to me so I can share with everybody else. But there's been a rare situation where I haven't been able to put people at comfort. And Mark, with that scenario, was the first one where I said, you know what? I don't know that there is an answer for it. It's probably going to be an individual decision with that scenario that I created. But here's what I would argue. In the past, who paid the broker fees? Both the buyer and the seller. It was the buyer. Put me on a debate, I can argue that one up and down the hill. Now, put me on the debate team for the listing. I can argue it up and down the hill. It's the listing broker. I can prove it. Guys, it's going to be between our ears. It's the best thing I can tell you. When we keep it as simple as what it really is, two things have changed. No longer advertised, therefore it's no longer guaranteed. Where do we always get the money from? The listing broker, the seller, the buyer. Where do we get it from most of the time before? The listing broker. What do I believe, based on everything that we've already been seeing, what I was projecting before? Buyer's going to build it into the purchase agreement, asking the seller to pay it. Now, is the seller paying it as a buyer? Yes. Oh, wait a minute. Seller's paying it. It says so. Wait a minute. That says that the buyer is responsible, but the seller, it's the same thing. It's the same money. Ragu, it's in there. You just gotta define how that 3% is getting paid. And guys, it could have said on the buyer purchase agreement, it could have said seller to pay buyer broker's fee. In a line item on the closing statement, debit, paying the buyer's broker. I'll tell you why I don't like it that way. That's the same thing that we've been doing that got us into this lawsuit in the first place. The buyer, as part of their purchase agreement, is saying, seller, I need you to contribute. By the way, I think the full amount. Why beat around the bush? Why do you get 2% here and 1%? Just put it all in, right? Because it's in there. The seller's going to look at the bottom line most of the time, because most agents understand net. Okay? And especially because it doesn't matter what happens between the top and the bottom, it's what's at the bottom. Okay? And it's great. I got Jay in here. Jay's, how long have you had your license? But how long have you been practicing? So I got Jay in here. I'm going to call him newer. Okay? Less than a year. Okay? Very little experience. And he's just sitting here back in the corner with a smile on his face and nodding his head. Because he doesn't know anything different. It's just like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, that's the way you would do it. The only reason that we're struggling is because we've had to live in the past. So,
But for seller, one sentence, you pay upfront or you pay later?
it was the first seller he dealt with, and he just hit it really simple then. So you either pay for it up front in this exclusive listing, or you pay it later. It's going to get in there. And by the way, you guys have heard me do this before, if you've been with me. If we follow the flow, here's what we know. The buyer had a whole load of money and they gave it to the seller in exchange for that house. The seller, in regards to marketing the property, came with an agreement with the listing broker, agreeing to pay a marketing fee of 6%. And as part of that, there was an agreement as to how much they would offer as compensation to a buyer's broker. So the reality is the buyer paid it because they had the money. Well, the seller paid it because they had the agreement that gave them that 6% that they could then offer the 3%. But you see, that didn't really need to do that because the listing broker could have kept all of that and never paid anything for marketing fees. So really the listing broker paid it. Guys, it's all a matter of semantics. It's the transaction. A buyer and seller coming together creates a transaction. Somebody's going to get the compensation, even if we're not involved. Somebody got it. That's why people go for sale by owner. For sale by owners believe they're going to keep all or most of it. Why does the buyer go directly to a for sale by owner? Well, a little bit different now today's market because it may just be what they need to do. But they believe that they're going to get the money. But as buyer's agents today, today's current market, what should we be doing? Calling upon for sale by owners, calling upon expireds, calling upon withdrawals, specifically on behalf of our buyers whom we represent. Because if we do that, we should be saving them money. In the 3% that we earn, you shouldn't have any concern over that. I should be looking at properties that aren't even on the market, haven't been on the market. I could blast snail mail to a neighborhood that they want to buy in, trying to find the individual who's going to be selling soon. Cost me what? A couple $100? But then I could get both sides of it. I could give them a reduced commission because I have both sides of it. And as a buyer, how much do you save because I found you a property that's not even on the market? Let me simplify it. $300,000 house. You answer this question yourself. How much are they going above the asking price? I'll tell you that I know they're $20,000 to $30,000. How much is your compensation? What's 3% of 300,000? $9,000. How much did you save the buyer because they hired you to have that kind of value? So you take your 9,000 off of that 30,000. They still cleared 21,000. You got to create value. We've got to do things that we've not done in the past in working with the buyer. We've got to go outside of the MLS to be able to search for properties, especially today's market. But prove your value. By the way, if I charge the buyer 5%, I'm not suggesting you necessarily do that. You better earn it if you do. But if I charge the buyer 5% because I'm searching for off-market properties and I'm investing money to be able to find these sellers, even if I charge 5% and it was a $300,000 house and they saved $30,000, how much did they make because they hired me and paid me 5%? $15,000. So, in reality, keep it simple. Hakuna Matata. We've got everything in place, and when we don't, we'll react quickly and be able to make it happen. So share with the manager, call me directly, let me know what you're running into. We can do more shares, because you could think about this, we're an hour and a half, again, and it's because we're thinking of new things, we're running into things, but the best thing we can do is to be prepared, but handle it as it is and keep it simple. Guys, if you need anything, I think you know how to find me. I can tell you, type in Darwin Conley into Google. I'm pretty certain I'm going to come up at the top. Okay, it's nice to have a name like Darwin. Let's put it that way. So with that, guys, thank you for your involvement. We'll call it our heated discussions, our frustrations, Pardon me if I offended anybody because I was trying to keep us on track. This is all about you guys and just making sure that we take care of our clients and customers first, take care of you, take care of our company. And on reality, by the way, you guys, we're going to be the teachers to everybody else out there in the marketplace. Very few companies are doing what we're doing to have these kinds of discussions. So enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, the rest of the week. Call me if you have questions. Have a great one, everybody. See ya.